Now, big business doesn't really mind a lot of these things. Regulation, for them, can actually be a good thing. Very big business, multinational corporations. Why? Because it's anti-competitive. They can absorb a lot of these costs. So you're not going to hear necessarily from GE about these things. But again, the small businessman, the entrepreneur, those are the people that are being hurt by this. And that's what I want to ask you guys about. Is there a place for the Romney campaign to make the case that these regulations are coming in term 2, that they are costing businesses an inordinate amount of money already, and that while this is sort of a hard thing for some people to project in their minds, this stuff could be catastrophic. And if President Obama does not have to run for re-election, the $90 billion a year smog rule, the $10 billion a year rear view camera thing, those could very well become a reality. I mean, do you see that or no?
Well, we already saw Joe Manchin, the Democratic senator from West Virginia, make great hay with regulation, cap and trade in particular, and he released an ad where he took a shotgun. He actually shot through cap and trade, and that was very appealing to his constituents. So these regulations, these issues, the way that they hit people at home, their pocketbooks, small businesses they can open, I think that these have real salience for voters, particularly, this idea of global warming. So that means that we have to hamstring our own economy and have higher prices.
Yeah, but for to have salience, Amy, I feel like you have to, again, attach that to some level of personal emotion. So the fact that Joe Manchin had success at the voting booth with cap and trade in West Virginia, right?
Right.
Coal state doesn't surprise me. But in the larger scale, in the broader scale, you have to make someone realize how this particular regulation, or whatever you put up, Buck, whichever one, is going to affect my life. Because it always exists in the abstract, right? It always exists in theory. I don't run into regulations that I know of that often in my life, but that's the whole point. I'm ignorant of how often I bump up against.
Can I take that as a beautiful segue into a piece the Wall Street Journal did this week about a bank, a relatively small bank branch called Luther Burr Bank. This was really interesting because Luther Burr Bank was sued by the Department of Justice, and they just settled this past week for $2 million, and they did not admit any wrongdoing in their lending practices. In fact, in some aspects of their lending, they were completely in compliance. There was one program in which they were lending out money, and the Department of Justice decided that there was an imbalance with regard to minority lending practices. Now, this is very interesting on a number of levels. One, this is a much smaller version of similar suits that have been brought against Bank of America and Wells Fargo, obviously massive banks. I mean, this is a very small bank. $3.6 billion in total assets is not a whole lot, and it's really only California-based. But this is the Obama administration. This was a very specific choice, showing that they are willing to use the power of government, again, to this, well, how does it affect me? I mean, this is a small local bank branch. I mean, this is the bank that you're supposed to, they know their customers. They give you the mortgage because they know Joe or John from down the street starting his business, whatever the case may be. They're sending a message, which is that we are going to enforce our will politically on people, and we are watching even the small banks. It's not about the big guys.
Right. I think most average Americans hear regulations and they associate that with the banks. And it's a very politically dangerous argument for Republicans to wade into, saying we want to loosen regulations, because most people think about the banks. But there's so many other areas, as you delineated, where average Americans, especially small business owners, should be concerned about regulations. And if Mitt Romney can frame it that way, I mean, if we all remember back to when Tim Pawlenty announced that he was going to run for president, he had to publicly apologize for once supporting cap and trade, because it was so politically dangerous for him to have done that. He had to atone to conservatives. So there is an appetite to hear that political candidates like Mitt Romney are going to be sensible about these things. I think Mitt Romney just needs to avoid the pratfall of talking about the banks.
Isn't that part of the issue, though, is that, as he points out, somebody being held to account for passing laws, but a lot of the times we're talking about this. This is just the EPA deciding, the executive branch deciding. They're kind of inoculated, if you will, from the impact of these decisions, because it's a way to get around Congress. The people can just decide that this is, they pass this very broad law. Obamacare is a perfect example of this. I mean, it's a monstrosity of regulations.
Yeah, I was just going to say Obamacare and Dodd-Frank, I think, have been two opportunities the Republicans have seized where it has hit home for people. When people were talking about Obamacare and overregulation and how that's going to affect their small business businesses, that was something that for a lot of small businesses around the country all could relate to and say, this is specifically how this is going to affect my daily life. But I agree with you. If you don't make these things hit home and make them real, people just see it as a stack of papers. How does that affect me?
And the big ones have effect, right? Obamacare, cap and trade.
Dodd-Frank.
Those have power. But I don't
freedom.
know that the totality of some of these smaller ones, that the EPA, the smog rules, the auto mandates, the greenhouse gas rules, I don't know that those, I don't know that you pile all those into a bucket, you got something that really resonates with the voting.
Well, I think if you pile it into the overlords, the environmentalists want to, impose these rules on you, which a lot of Americans don't think are reasonable. And if you put that together with the ideology behind it, the ideology that's keeping Keystone from being built. I mean, that could be creating so many jobs for so many people in just the very areas where you're saying that this could resonate and be politically important for Mitt Romney.
The ideology component, I think, Amy, is crucial here because it is an opportunity, I think. And Will, you're right. The huge things, what we've talked about, Obamacare, Dodd-Frank, people know what those are, and they have an understanding there's a macro effect, that will affect everybody in some capacity. People with 401ks, people who go to the doctor, right? Everybody deals with that. But there's also this broader issue of just the fact that the Obama administration, we look at these, we're looking at metrics, objective metrics. They're passing more of these regulations. It's a freedom issue because at its core, the people in D.C. right now, at their core, they think that they can regulate life and make it better if we just give them enough power. And I think that's very dangerous.
I think